welcome to another episode of the Bring Me to Life podcast. This is the fourth part of the Sacred Sexuality series with Amara Amethyst and her guest. They talk about different ways of expressing sexual energy. So thanks once again for tuning in and enjoy.
Greetings. I'm Amara Amethyst, and this is the Sovereign Sacred Sexuality series on the Project Bring Me to Life podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in with us as we empower ourselves and shift together. So you may also be interested to listen to the first 3 episodes of this series. This is number 4. The first episode was a basic introduction to the idea and concept of sacred sexuality, including a very lively conversation about consent. Our second episode was about sexual healing to transform trauma into bliss. And in the third episode, we dove a little bit more into different traditions of sacred sexuality around the world and through time. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I recommend listening to those first 3 episodes of the Sovereign Sacred Sexuality series. It's a lot of S's. So you're invited to do that. You can also connect with me on social media. Again, my name is Amara Amethyst, and I am on Facebook. I have an Amara Amethyst page and also Nectar of the Goddess Temple, as well as on Instagram. I'm Sonic Priestess, so I welcome continued interactions. And if you have any questions or comments about any of the things that we're talking about in any of these episodes, you can make a comment right on the podcast post, or you can contact me on social media as well. So thanks for tuning in. And today I have a guest with me to talk about we're going to talk about different ways of expressing sexual energy. And so today my guest is Thomas Spellman. And would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, Amara. Thanks, Amara. Thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be on your podcast.
Great. Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. We've already had several, to me, really kind of like exciting conversations about sacred sexuality and ranging the whole gamut from celibacy to some types of sexual encounters that people may not even be aware about the existence of. So I look forward to continuing that conversation today for everybody else to hear as well.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying just the opportunity to explore different aspects of sacred sexuality. There are a lot of different aspects, and I think we often, when we hear in our mainstream consciousness hear sexuality, it conjures up kind of like mainstream ideas of sexuality, pop stars and pop music definitions of fast cars and skimpy clothes and going out to the bar and dancing, and which is a very like visceral, physical kind of sexuality. But what I like about this context in this forum is the realm of sacred sexuality brings up a lot of other possibilities that are just completely missing from a lot of those what I consider to be more physical or in my opinion, more mundane forms of sexuality.
Yeah.
It's a lot more exciting things to experience.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to experience out there. And yeah, I agree. Once we start getting into the realm of sacred sexuality, it really opens up a lot more possibilities for experience. For experiencing energy in different ways. Yeah. So that was a little bit of an intro, and I'm actually interested to hear, since this whole series is about sacred sexuality, if you'd like to share maybe what your perspective about sacred sexuality is, or like what that means to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think for me, my whole life changed when I started meditating in my 20s. And that began a period of questing, of studying spiritual teachings of the world, and really climaxed for me around the year 2000, in which I kind of had a series of like finding God, as well as letting go of the need to conceptualize God experiences. And mixed in there were these visions of the divine feminine, which I understood to be kind of a mixture of my own projections of like my ideal partner, but also what I, in looking back on it, I think was kind of this acknowledgement that I am on the masculine end of this physical creation of humanity, and I see the male and female biological forms as being like two wings of the same bird of humanity, and that so for me as more the male or masculine, recognizing the feminine end as kind of this embodiment of the divine and like yearning for that, that to me captures this idea of sacred sexuality, which is like, me as my whole being, my spiritual, mental, physical, emotional being, yearning for that union with the complement.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And we'd also love to hear from all of you out there in the audience what your thoughts and feelings and concepts of sacred sexuality are. So if you'd like to leave us a comment or connect with Project Bring Me to Life or connect with me, we would really love, we'd really love to hear what this means for you or what this brings up for you, because it's so deep. So for me, I've had a lot of different meanings of it throughout my personal quest. At first it was this idea of kind of that idealized twin flame, twin soul union, which if you're not familiar with that concept, it's a rabbit hole that we could go down, but we're not going to fully go down the rabbit hole, but I'll just sort of briefly explain what that means so you have some context for what I'm saying. Do you want to take a pause? We're going to take a short pause. Okay. We're going to start again. So for me, this idea of the twin flame or twin soul relationship is that having the understanding that we all have an essence vibration, and that in certain instances, this soul, this essence has split into multiple parts to experience life on this planet as humans, and that we can come back together and merge in this sacred union, in this loving connection and life partnership to just reunite and become one with each other and one with source and spirit. So for me, for a while, that was like my vision of sacred sexuality, was finding this sort of like what you mentioned a little bit as well, or what I heard was a vision of sort of an idealized partner as the divine feminine, where in my case it was I identify as a woman, so for me, and a heterosexual woman, mostly heterosexual, so for me that ideal partner is like the masculine form of that. And so that was my concept, and then I moved into a different phase of just really having this intense passion for source and spirit and the divine and God or goddess, and just really feeling that intense desire to merge that does actually feel almost sexual in some ways. And so then that was the meaning that it took on. And so it goes through a lot of different steps. And for me, when I've been moving through these different layers and steps of levels of understanding and interacting with this experience, that has brought up a lot of different things for me as well. Like programming that maybe is not in alignment with that, or just things that I thought were my thoughts and feelings and beliefs, but actually weren't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big piece of it, isn't it? I mean, that's one thing I kind of discovered in reflecting back on that time of those visions. What I considered to be visions was, the idea that they were projections was actually something I kind of realized later. It's like, it's kind of a mixture of these different, idealized like women I had known combined with my own projections, which really are a large part of that is programming, and like a big piece of that is societal programming that I had introjected of what is the perfect woman or what is the perfect feminine, so it's all mixed up in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also for me, even discovering ways that I wanted to sexually interact versus what I thought was supposed to happen or how I initially thought I wanted to interact was actually quite different. And we're going to be talking today about various ways of expressing our sexual energy with ourselves and with others. And so I think we can transition into talking about how what we've already been talking about a little bit, about how the most common understanding of sexuality in the Western world that we live in is a very physical understanding. It's about bodies touching each other and maybe entering each other or whatever the case may be, but it's a very physical experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just recently have been studying an area called remote viewing, which is all about perceiving information remotely. And one of the foremost researchers in this area is this man named Ingo Swann, and he's written this book called Sacred Sexuality. And one of the things I really like in like the very first chapter of his book is he talks about this exactly, that not only, I mean, we're talking about sexual energy in a way where the two of us are just like, we kind of know what we're talking about here. But a point that he makes is that actually in the dominant psychology of our society, sexuality is much more physically oriented. And he kind of points out these four areas that we generally speak about sexuality.
Oh, nice.
One is a clinical way derived from the structural anatomy. So, male and female anatomy, fitting together.
So like literal, like this is what's happening.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Like sex ed in school, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, it's just talking about the body parts.
Yeah.
Another one is the psychological, which maybe gets into Freudian stuff, like the psychology of attraction to, the opposite sex, but it's all kind of this internal, ideas and that sort of thing realm, which is actually very profound part. And then the societal approaches, which gets into like morality and ethics. Different groups have different ideas about what's moral and what's not moral. Right.
Yeah. And then that gets a whole lot more interesting too, as you move through different groups and begin engaging with people who maybe do have an awareness about sacred sexuality or who are on a spiritual path or, have certain other morals and standards or different ways of relating.
Right.
Yeah.
And for someone else, they might just be operating from a completely different reality box of different programming where there are certain rules and you follow the rules, whereas someone else is much more experiential or intuition based, where it's how does this feel in this moment, and then the fourth category he talks about is sexuality in art or in music, and that's kind of, we were getting to that earlier, like pop, music or pop culture.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sexuality in our pop culture and our movies. We're inundated with sexuality as it's used to try to sell its products.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of in my interpretation of it, it's like a warped version of sexuality, especially in films and media that's created in the United States of America. The sexuality that is shown there, like the physical sexuality, is very it's not based on intimacy or connection between people so much as it's based on creating more feelings of desire and wanting and needing a certain thing.
Yep.
So there's to me, a very different energy. And also there's certain standards that they're only allowed to show certain things. And so now I think with different forms of media being more available, that's broadening a bit, which is great. But yeah, what we have access to, what the majority of the public has access to seeing through TV or whatever their other forms of media are, is actually really limited. Yeah. It's interesting.
And it's in some ways it's a sensationalized form,
right?
But in a very limited area that's been overly focused on, but then whole other areas are basically left out, which I feel like is what we're getting into, which is more this, at least what's most interesting to me right now is the non-physical realm of sexuality, or what we're calling sexual energies, which is profound. It's like the difference between our physical body made up of tissues and this electromagnetic field around the body that can be measured, or like the brain waves that can be measured with sensors, and seems like we're just barely beginning to realize this vast potential, scientifically, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. Right. And if any of you are interested in learning more about what Thomas was just talking about with the measurable energy fields around the human body, a really great place to start with that is the HeartMath Institute. They have a lot of scientific information and research that is available on their website. So that's a great place to start in learning more about that, if that's something that's interesting to you and you want to take a more scientific approach. So just as a little side note, check out the HeartMath Institute and take it from there. There's a lot of other information out there, but that's just a really great place to start.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So physical expressions of sexuality are beautiful. It's really powerful and amazing, and so we're definitely not knocking that in any means.
Sure.
Just to make that clear as well. And there are ways that we can physically connect with each other and express our sexuality physically that are very empowering and build up a lot of energy in our bodies and in our energy fields and in our partners' bodies and energy fields. We can then choose what we want to do with that collective energy that's created. We can give it back to the earth. We can use it to manifest things into our lives. We can send out a prayer. We can choose to do whatever we want to do with the energy that's built up from that physical expression. And so I've also been sharing a couple of exercises and practices that include breath work. So that's a little bit more physical. And then I also did share a couple of physical touch exercises that people could try out to begin exploring their own bodies or the bodies of their partners in a different way, and just relating in a different way to our bodies. So
yeah, and on that topic, I mean, an experience I've had a fair amount in that realm is a form of dance called contact improv. That's a really wonderful way to really have a much more sensual and much more intimate interaction with someone else. Mm-hmm. And for me, some of my favorite dances, or highest, most ecstatic experiences of that, have been with lovers. But that dance is very much transcends like a purely, like, I guess for me, necessarily erotic form of dance. But it's very, very full of sensual and intimate interaction energetically. That and as well with non-lovers. I've had really wonderful dances with people who I barely know. Mm-hmm. But it's this really wonderful realm where we can share energy and interact in a sensual and intimate way without it necessarily being, oh, we're now in an erotic dance together.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I've recently started exploring the realms of contact improv dance, and I feel like I'm still a bit awkward with it, but also it's really exciting. It's really fun. It really helps me to feel bliss in my body and connection with other people in a platonic way. And it also has been helping me a lot with my boundaries. I've always been hyper aware of other people's boundaries and wanting to do my best to respect them. And just based on some of my personal experiences from the past of just some traumatic experiences that I've had, I was not as aware of what my boundaries were because I stuffed them for so long because they were just not respected when I was younger. So I kind of lost touch with that. And contact improv and some other forms of dance have really helped me to kind of reclaim that area of knowing what kind of touch I want to share and with who, and to know that it's okay to say, to just like not engage if I don't want to engage, or only engage to the extent that I want to. So this may also be something that could be helpful for other people who are, learning more about their own boundaries too, because it is a platonic, physical, intimate setting. So yeah, that's really beautiful. So there are lots of ways that we can interact with each other, and that physical expression is just one. It's kind of like scratching the surface. Sorry, I had to. I thought that was funny. Thanks for laughing. Yeah. It's basically just scratching the surface of the experiences that we are capable of having. And so for me, a way that I was able to tune in a little bit more, because also I've always been extremely sensitive to people's energy, and so a way for me to really be able to tune in with myself and also open up to experience energies in a different way was to explore celibacy. So to explore not engaging in physical sexual interactions with other people, sometimes for a set period of time that I had predetermined. Sometimes it was just the way it was for a while. And I know that you and I have talked before, Thomas, about your experience with celibacy. So I'd love to hear more about that. And I'd like to start off by just hearing like what does celibacy look like for you? Like, what are your agreements with yourself type of a thing for like, could you create that for us a little?
Yeah. So I remember 2 years ago writing a blog post where I was kind of reflecting on what I was perceiving in myself as a pattern that I was wanting to change, which was kind of a repeating pattern of 5 or so sexual partners per year. And it almost was like clockwork. It was like, and I was noticing like these recurring patterns of of interactions that, of what I would call maybe little aspects of codependency or that sort of thing that were coming up over and over and over again. And one thing I wondered was, well, maybe, because I'm just jumping straight into a sexual relationship with these women who I just met, I'm not like getting to know them well enough to recognize some of these patterns that I'm wanting to change in myself sooner than once I'm already in a relationship. And then it's like that kind of bubbles up, and then that leads to me wanting to, no longer be in that relationship. Well, these are questions I had. So I wrote this blog post saying, and I began wondering, having studied the Baha'i faith, there's this idea of after, splitting up with a partner, you take a year before that partnership is like actually completely separate. And that's an idea that I began wondering about and thinking, maybe I should try that. And then a whole year went by and I went through the same patterns again. And then I finally was like, okay, I'm going to do this. So yesterday was actually my 1-year anniversary of having set that intention for myself.
The intention of celibacy.
And so what that meant for me was not only I did that partially to attempt to break those patterns or those, that cycle, but also I was wanting to kind of clear my slate energetically to kind of detach from all of these heart connections, like quantum entanglement, so to speak, with all of these beings, these wonderful beings who I had entangled myself with, and kind of just, maybe find some more clarity, maybe, and also focus my intention on being more perceptive of the qualities that I wish to have in a partner, setting intention, calling in, my ideal partner, wanting to be more, basically also practice not engaging sexually. Because, one aspect of being in a committed relationship, which is part of what I am cultivating through this year of celibacy, is wishing to be more committed with one partner. But part of that is having the ability to resist or to not engage in whatever next opportunity comes up. So it was partly that as well. Yeah. It was all of these things. There are a lot of things, but that's kind of the basics of it. But primarily it's about cultivating in myself, being more in alignment or more resonant with my ideal partner, Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I know that celibacy can also take many forms, just like, any of these other ways of being. And so I know that for some people, they don't engage physically, sexually with other people at all, like beyond maybe like hugging or like snuggling. Other people, have different layers of boundaries, like maybe they'll kiss people, but that's it. Or maybe they're just not physically having penetrative sex. So it could look like a lot of different things. True. Depending on what people's goals and intentions are. And
yeah, for me, it was pretty much, I did not kiss anyone. Other than like greeting, almost like half kiss on the cheek kind of thing, but definitely no romantic kissing. Or I did, however, have some good cuddles. And that was the thing I missed the most from my year of celibacy, was missing out on the cuddles. But I went on a music tour recently, and a couple of the different one of the places we played at, there was actually cuddle party planned for the same place. So we got to have some good cuddles.
Yeah, perfect.
Really experienced cuddlers. And then at another party, there was actually a professional cuddler and her lover, her girlfriend, were there, and when they found out that I was on a year of celibacy, they offered to cuddle me for a little while, and that was amazing.
Yeah.
Professional cuddlers, I got to say, if you're interested in exploring the possibility ways of, sensual physical contact that are non-sexual, that is a really amazing path. And I mean, apparently there are more and more professional cuddlers.
Yeah, it's popping up all over the country. So, it started out mostly on the West Coast in major cities, surprisingly. But now, it has really spread out to most parts of the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are lots of ways to meet our physical needs for touch and sensual touch and intimate touch without it having to be sexual. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing is, I also attempted to avoid masturbation.
Yeah, that's another one that people do. Sometimes when people are in a period of celibacy, they'll also not engage sexually with themselves either, physically.
Yeah. I was not completely successful with that.
Yeah. I've had a couple of periods of celibacy, and that was also my intention at one point, and I also didn't quite make it with that part of the intention.
Yeah, but in all of this, it's like, the most important thing, I think, is having a perspective of compassion and forgiveness and gentleness with ourselves, and that's really most important.
Absolutely. And that's something that I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it really is so important to be compassionate and gentle and loving towards ourselves and towards others.
Yeah.
But I find that for myself and for many other people who I talk to, oftentimes we're the hardest on ourselves.
Definitely.
And so just remembering to bring that essence of love and compassion back to ourselves can be a game changer. Sort of along those same lines, we also talked before about having new ideals and new values about sexuality, and then how that measures up with the reality of how we're acting. And I think that that's also a really interesting and important conversation that's part of this as well. So did you want to mention anything about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I'm curious to know. I mean, I would love for you to be more specific in your question.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I guess my first reaction to that is kind of what I referenced earlier, which is there was this period where I kind of was developing these ideas about what I wanted, but then was still kind of acting in the same way I had been. Is that kind of in line what you're talking about?
Yeah, I have also experienced that, where I, have this ideal way that I would like to be in the world, and that I would like to interact with people and engage sexually. And I have this vision of like ritual of a ceremonial, like coming together and honoring each other. And that has often not been the case when I'm actually engaging with a lover. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And I just like to acknowledge that. and also, again, it reminded me when we were talking about having compassion for ourselves, that sort of just reminded me of that.
Yeah. And there's another aspect of how I think my experience was in that similar realm, which is part of my motivation for taking the year of celibacy was I was noticing that I had kind of a split between, like there are certain women in my social circles who I'm attracted to, but that I was not feeling worthy of, or I kind of put up on a pedestal, and didn't really feel like I wasn't really like pursuing relationships with them, but I was pursuing relationships with other women with whom however, there was something missing. And it's almost like there was this split in me where I was, recurringly getting into what I knew from the very beginning was going to be a short kind of casual relationship, because I knew I wasn't interested in a long-term relationship with them. While at the same time, there were other women who I knew I wanted that, but I wasn't pursuing that with them. So there was kind of this strange split. And so, part of this year of celibacy was to, like I said, to kind of clear my slate, focused on setting my own intentions, getting really clear with myself. What do I really want? Doing, what is the self-work that I need to do? What is, do I need to change my identity? Do I need to change my belief systems? Do I actually need to change my physical lifestyle? I can only change myself. And obviously there's kind of this thing happening where I'm not giving myself permission to, pursue the type of relationship I want to have. Therefore, what do I need to do? And so this year has been also a process of reflection and meditation and kind of, attempting to get more in alignment with my own ideal in that sense. And one interesting thing that's happened is that some of the women in my social circle with whom I had kind of placed on this pedestal and felt this almost like a separation from, or a veil separating us, I've actually and I've just naturally become better friends with. And our friendship, our platonic friendships, have grown and increased in value to me, or fulfillment, I guess, just as friends. And also all of my female friendships have increased in fulfillment. It's like I've just found much more depth and comfort and fulfillment is a word that keeps coming up in all of my female friendships. I think partly because I removed that part of my psychology where there was always this question of, the sexual relationship piece. And it allowed for, I think, more maybe authentic, just being present as fellow sentient beings.
That's beautiful.
Which is very fulfilling. And to me, actually, is getting more into this realm of sacred, not only sacred sexuality, but even just sacred existence. And the sacred sexuality piece relates to another evolving part of my view of reality, which is I'm coming to see myself as first and foremost as a conscious being. And that's higher in my identity, or more, that's a higher priority in my identity than my male or masculine self-identity, polar identity.
Right.
And that's another thing I'm finding in this, is that how much we kind of attach to our either male or our gender binary identity, or like rebel against it, or reject it, or but this focus on gender as the primary identity is something I'm noticing. And for me, I've been finding that actually I'm identifying much more with consciousness, with intellect, with like, what does it mean to be a conscious, thinking, feeling being? And yes, and also I am this masculinity as well, but that's secondary to to consciousness.
That's awesome. The way that I relate to that is I feel in the past couple of years I've really been exploring what it means to be a woman, what it means to be embodied as a feminine being, and also being able to loosen my grip on that, so to speak, loosen my mental grip and my identity grip on that, to this beautiful feeling of and knowing of being essence embodied. That's how I feel, is I feel that we all have a particular essence, and we somehow squeeze it down into these these bodies.
Yep.
And so we are essence embodied, and that's a really powerful realization to have. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that essence and that energy a little bit later on when we're talking about other types, other ways of connecting sexually. I would like to hear just a little bit more, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about your period of celibacy. And I'd also like to share a little bit about my experience with celibacy as well before we move on to that next piece. So maybe we could just talk for a couple more minutes about this before moving on to the other ones.
Definitely.
But as I mentioned before, I also have experimented with periods of celibacy, and I had 2 9-month periods of celibacy. I've had some other shorter ones as well, but for me, the shorter ones, any period of celibacy can be very powerful. And also for me, I've noticed one of the most striking things actually that I noticed was that it took several months for me to be able to actually feel my own energy in my body again, and only my own energy. Like it really I would say it took like 6 months for me to clear out of my former lover's energy being in my body still.
Wow.
And that's something that nobody ever, until I started really studying sacred sexuality and started working with teachers directly, nobody ever told me that the people who we connect with sexually, that their energy, connects with your energy and stays with it and stays in it. And I feel that that's really relevant and important information for people to have access to. So I just wanted to share that. And that experience of just really feeling myself and being able to come back to center, being able to actually feel grounded, was really beautiful and powerful. And I had not experienced that for a while, really, before that, after I started being sexually active. And I believe that based on my interactions with people and just hearing what they share with me, that this gift of celibacy and space and really feeling our own energy is not a gift that many people in our Western culture give to themselves once they have started to be sexually active. There's a lot of serial monogamy is kind of what a lot of people call it. So that's choosing to be in monogamous relationships, but then when one relationship ends, almost immediately or very quickly jumping into the next relationship. Of course, not everybody is monogamous. Some people are polyamorous or engage in relationship anarchy or any other number of ways of relating. And they're all valid ways of relating as long as
some of that.
Yeah, as long as they're consensual and everybody is in agreement, they're all really beautiful and valid ways of interacting. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's also really powerful to connect with our own energy. And as we are all on this journey of being essence embodied and making our way through this experience, of course, we can choose to have whatever experience we'd like to have. And also for those of us who are choosing to make this walk home to source and oneness, being able to feel our own essential energy can be very helpful towards that end. It has been for me. So I would say for me that was my most striking thing that I noticed during my period of celibacy. And also I agree too that my relationships with people of all genders took on a much more fulfilling sense. And I also noticed that I didn't feel frustrated with people as much because I wasn't attaching an expectation to a certain way of relating with people that I had in the past done when I was relating with somebody on a sexual level. So it was really eye-opening for me. I learned a lot about myself and about my patterns that I couldn't see as easily while I was actively doing them, but that I really noticed the difference once I gave myself a bit of space from it and was able to experience things in a different way. So that was really valuable for me. And I'm wondering if you have any like top insights or things that have really like struck you from this experience, or like anything you feel like you've really gained out of it.
Yeah, I think I definitely want to second and amplify that idea of, I mean, as time has gone by, this experience has become more and more profound. And I mean, you know, in the short term, 3 months, 4 months, you know, I was actually with two women pretty much within the same time period, a little over a year ago. And so just like taking that year, just after 3 or 4 months, I was, you know, just beginning to like separate those energies and kind of be on a different, more in myself, more in my own energy. What is my own, you know, my own being, just completely solo? What is, you know, this temple? What is, you know, what is my resonance? What is my path? If I'm just and so I was beginning to have more and more energy, just returning back to just what is my path? What is my optimal path? Or a saying that I got from, I think, partly influenced by Bashar. I don't know if you're familiar with Bashar, but it's this, my path of greatest excitement. What is my path of greatest excitement? Which I generally fill in with whatever I'm, you know, what is my path of greatest meaning or greatest fulfillment or that sort of thing. But then as time went by, I have been experienced something far more profound than I expected, which maybe it's combined with my having begun exploring remote viewing and kind of opening up to these other levels of, wow, what is consciousness? For quite a while, I've had this idea or this recognition that I identify more as consciousness than as, you know, my one of the two gender polarity identities. But much more recently, I've been going much more into that. Oh, but what is consciousness? And finding much more levels of profound insight in that realm. And I actually wrote a blog post called Sacred Sexuality a couple years ago that I was responding to an article by David Dida in Uncommon Ground. And he is kind of considered one of these, the man's man. He wrote this book, The Way of the Superior Man. And I'm not an expert. I haven't read all his books or anything, but there was something he wrote in this article that I kind of found interesting, which is, I mean, a couple things I really like that resonate with what you said are like this quote, you know, as what he calls third stage experience in relationship is in which we quote, we allow the universe to live us, or all of us are being lived by an infinite force that is living everything, you know, which I feel like is another way of different words for a similar thing that you were saying.
Yeah.
You know, and that I have been becoming more aware of experientially in myself, which is this experience of being consciousness, or of being the experience of I amness, you know, this experience of, just I am, you know, is far more profound to me than
it's very profound
than I'm a man, which is good too. But you know, But so anyway, in this article, I just found like it was interesting because I interpreted Nida to be associating consciousness more with the masculine, and then like emotion or some other things with feminine, or feeling with the feminine, which is different. Like I'm saying, I feel like consciousness is, from my perspective, I perceive it to be a collective experience, you know, for all of us. And then within that, there is a more masculine or a more feminine experience.
The duality comes.
Yeah.
It's like the consciousness level, and that's the non-dual level. So and then then starts to get that split.
Right.
Masculine, feminine, physical, non-physical.
Yeah.
All of these things.
Yeah. So that's just a little aside but I bring it up because it addressed some of the things, and it's called Sacred Sexuality. But in this realm of, this gets into, perception or experience of sexual energy on another level, on like a non-physical level too, because I've been having, going into these similar experience or settings that I have traditionally been in, dance parties or, nightclubs or ecstatic dance is one of my favorite things on the whole planet. We have one of the best ecstatic dances here in the world.
We've
in
got
Nevada
a great
City.
ecstatic dance.
But walking into the dance floor and really getting into it and beginning to experience some of these same almost like sexual energy interactions with people without even touching. Even to the degree, and it might be I'm closer to someone who I'm attracted to, and I'm feeling more of this interaction, but without even touching, and just like really deepening in that and enjoying that. And the more I go into it, the richer that has been becoming, where it's actually this non-physical energetic interaction is in some ways, there's this old saying, like, it tastes better in our imagination than when we actually taste it,
yeah, juicy.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think the same thing can be true in relationships.
Definitely.
We just imagine all these amazing things, and the fantasies are so rich and juicy, and then we haven't. It's like, oh.
Like, oh wow, that's great.
Right? And so,
and it is great, but it also,
is.
We've created this idealized fantasy in our, I hear you.
But I mean, one of the questions is, well, is that because there actually is something happening on the non-physical? And maybe if we just jump to the physical, it's not that there's anything wrong with the physical, but maybe we are untrained or we haven't developed the unrefined in the non-physical realm, and maybe the physical can be 100 times better than it is if we bring in more of this awareness and experience and attunement and refinement of this non-physical, energetic level of interaction. And so this is something I've been exploring in these different settings and in situations. And I mean, I've had some experiences. Even there was a Valentine's Day dance party that we both were at. And I had this really profoundly beautiful, wonderful experience where I was on the dance floor. And yes, I had some particularly exciting, energetic interactions with a couple of people whom I was attracted to. But I also just had this feeling of like energetically dancing with and interacting with everybody in the room in a really beautiful way. And then that actually just expanded out. And I felt like I was like interacting energetically with consciousness beyond and other beings out beyond the room, and even everywhere.
Right. And what is that experience like for you? So you say that you feel the energies. What is that? Is it a physical sensation? What is that like for you?
It's a form of bliss. It's, to use a word.
Right.
to
use it's
words
definitely
for something
hard
that's
to
beyond words.
Put it into words. But if you could put it into words, what words would you choose?
But I guess if you imagine, it's similar to like imagining what it's like if you were dancing very close with someone who you were very attracted to. There's something you can almost feel. There's like that give and take. There's a flow of energy. There's a desire. There is definitely a desire there, but there's a desire that's continuously almost like refreshed. There's an energy flow, which is different than a desire where that person's not present. When they're present, there's a dynamic. There's some kind of dynamic interaction. And so that, I think, is the best I can describe it. It's an experience of a dynamic interaction rather than just like witnessing or almost like looking at a picture and like, having some kind of fantasy interaction with an idea of somebody, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me to describe.
It's definitely hard to put it into words. I'm just curious because, because I'm curious,
Yeah.
and also because I think the audience is probably curious too. For me, when I feel things like that, I perceive energetic interactions. I mentioned before that I would say quite sensitive, and sometimes I feel energetic interactions as though they were physical interactions. Like it's the same type of sensation to me sometimes that an energetic interaction has.
Interesting.
The same as a physical interaction.
Right.
And so that's very interesting. It's intriguing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it does feel almost physical, or it does feel physical. Like I feel it in my body. Sometimes I feel it more as my essential self, my consciousness, when my perception is not as much on my physical form and my body and my skin, when it's able to pull back and be that consciousness, that flow, that essence, then I sense emerging with the other energies that are either around me from other people who are around, or energies of people who are far away, who I'm intending to connect with. I've had a lot of long distance sexual encounters with people on energetic levels, that some people would call astral levels, that have been quite intense. Some of them were during dream time when I was sleeping, and sometimes it's just a dream, and sometimes it's more than that. I believe. Yeah. But I've also had these experiences while I was awake as well, and so it's interesting to experience that from a consciousness standpoint versus from a physical body standpoint.
That's that brings up something for me that's actually another reason why I wanted to explore celibacy, but is on a whole nother profound level that I've only actually spoken about with a few people, which is a few years ago, I had a daily meditation and prayer practice. And whenever I do that, I get into like this other alternate dimension, it feels like, when I have a daily meditation. And I'm just beginning that again. It's really wonderful. But during that, right after this one day, I had this experience of like suddenly hearing these angelic voices speaking to me. And it was really first time in my life I've ever had that, even to the point of like, they're saying, you should make note of this date because this is the most important day of your life.
Wow.
And so I ran and got my notebook and came back and started writing it down, and they waited for me and then kept talking to me afterwards, like, holy moly. But one of the things that they said was, they basically, like, there were angelic voices, and then it shifted to one singular deep male voice, which I feel like, seemed almost like my truest, deepest voice when I'm in my most truest, deepest self. But at that time, it was more of a conversation between, my internal voice I use when I speak quietly in this other voice. But the voice basically just said, your wish will be granted. You will have a most beautiful child with the most beautiful woman. And that was about it. And I kind of just had this vision of kind of a spirit body of a woman giving birth to a child. And it was a really profound experience.
Wow.
And I don't really know, did I just imagine that? I don't know, but I don't, necessarily doubt it. It's been a kind of like a guiding experience that has given me strength to kind of take these steps of personal transformation, of attempting to be a better me, or to improve myself. But the following 2 nights, I had these really powerful dreams where basically I wound up making love with this spherical light being.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, I remember
Which-
you told me about this before.
Which wound up being like the most profoundly beautiful, amazing, like full being union I've ever experienced. And I woke up, wet dream, but it's like, oh my gosh, this was just such a divinely blissful. It was like, union with the divine on all levels.
Yeah.
And, coming a day or two after these voices speaking to me saying that, I was like, holy moly, what is this? But then I found a year later, I was continuing these same patterns, and that was kind of like that reflection a year later of, wait a second, I had this beautiful experience, these beautiful messages. Really, I want to do whatever I can to prepare myself or transform myself into that, into that reality in which that can become true. And so that was a big part of my choosing to do a year of celibacy.
That's pretty amazing. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, I have not had that experience. That sounds like a very unique and powerful experience. But I have had other experiences of union with non-human beings.
Wow.
And yeah, I have a human tantra partner who's a teacher of mine as well, and we practice what I call temple healing with each other, which I use the term temple healing for sexual energy work and physical sexual healing work as well, because I personally don't only practice one tradition. So I just call it temple healing. And so I was receiving a healing session, a sexual energy healing session, and there was so much energy that was moving through my body. I'm just thinking of one example right now, that there was so much energy moving through my body that I felt like I was dissolving, like my physical body was dissolving. And I had an experience where I perceived another being in the same space, that I felt like I was kind of popping into this other space, or that it seemed to be a masculine presence, a very large blue being.
Wow.
With a very long, elongated head. And like coming into the same energetic space as this being. And he like reached inside my head.
Wow.
And we had this merging time together, and it was really powerful. Wow. There was a lot of energy moving through my system, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it at the time. So it felt like it was a positive interaction. It didn't feel like I wasn't like freaked out by it or anything like that, which is great. I really trust my inner compass with things like that. Because I do have a strong intention to be only interacting with things that are fully aligned with my highest good and the highest good of all that is. So it doesn't really stray from that very often. I feel pretty good about that. But it was a very profound experience that I had several years ago. I've also had another profound, what I believe to have been a fourth dimensional sexual encounter with somebody who actually is also here in physical form, who I was friends with at the time, and had this experience that actually felt very physical. Like all of a sudden I felt like I was physically being penetrated and having sex with somebody, even though I was standing alone and I was standing in a room fully clothed, not doing that in this body. But it really all of a sudden felt like that. So I believe that there are a lot of things going on in other levels of dimensions, in other versions of reality. And there are ways that we can connect with other beings from a distance, so from a physical distance, because really we are all one, we're all made of the same everything. And so really there's not distance in the way that we generally tend to agree that it exists. And so I know that you also had some interesting information or insights about sort of astral or...
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's coming up for me on that level is, again, from the same book, the Psychic Spirituality by Ingo Swann. And he talks about how after he was out of... He was one of the people who kind of created the remote viewing program, which was a government program to develop a protocol for psychic spying. But after he left that program, he was researching with this couple, doctors Elmer and Elise Green, and Elmer and Elise Green, and they built this copper mirror that was inspired from some information in the theosophical literature of letters. They're called the Mahatma letters, which are apparently these letters from these very advanced beings in India. And they described this chamber that they would use to like bring their students into having greater clairvoyant powers. And so Ingo in his book describes participating in this experiment. And what he describes is that, and he already, the context is he was already a somewhat world famous psychic, perceiving things at a distance and that sort of thing.
Right.
But he said that sitting in this little chamber with this shiny copper wall, his level of like perceiving energy fields around people was just greatly enhanced. And he also mentioned specifically sexual energies, and it's a major part of his book, obviously, and I'm not going to recount all of that, but I just bring it up as something, if people are curious about this, I think it's a very fascinating read, and at least thought-provoking, and possibly even imagining, opening up to perceiving these other realms. But I mean, something he brings up again is that this is something that is definitely a realm that our mainstream is just barely beginning to really think about, and so I really appreciate this opportunity to explore some of these realms.
Yeah, it's a great... I am also very grateful for the opportunity to share in this way with people online through this podcast. So thank you so much to Project Bring Me to Life, to CeeLo Clausen and Shannon Shine. Thank you. Again, just barely scratched the surface of a very intriguing and deep subject. And
so profoundly important.
Exactly. Yeah. Something that I would like to mention just in closing before we wrap up is that when we're starting to explore sexual interactions physically or energetically with other beings, it's so important to really be in touch with ourselves and be in alignment with ourselves, and to really know what our boundaries are and to be firm in that. And with these types of more like psychic or astral or energetic interactions, I would personally strongly recommend having a meditation practice that you have already been to establish a strong meditation practice before trying to start having these types of psychic or astral sexual interactions.
Totally agree.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And to really be doing that self-care and self-work, and to just bring discernment into what energies you are opening yourself up to and allowing yourself to interact with in energy and also in the physical. That, again, coming back to that compassion and gentleness with ourselves.
And we always have a choice And it's, on all levels, we always have the option of saying no to any kind of energies, whether physical or non-physical,
exactly,
that we come into contact with.
Exactly. Yeah, we are in a free will universe here on this planet Earth.
Yep.
And that's a pretty cool thing. So thanks for choosing to listen to this podcast series and tuning in with us. Thank you, Thomas, for joining me on this super fascinating podcast episode.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to get to have this conversation with you and to share this wonderful exploration with all of our listeners.
Yeah, and we've been talking also about maybe collaborating again on another episode coming up later in the month or potentially next month about holy desire. So stay tuned for that, because that is also another juicy episode coming up. So yes, once again, thank you so much for joining us here. And if you'd like to connect with us, we welcome that. We'll leave some links for ways that you can learn more about Thomas and connect with him. Do you want to share your website?
I mentioned a few times my blog, and it's at thomos.com, thomos.com. That's like cosmos, but with a th. And I have, every now and then I just think about something enough to write about it. So.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, so thanks again, and much love and many blessings until we meet again. Enjoy your sexual energy and your exploration of that, and may it bring you bliss and enlightenment. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thanks for shining on with us.